welcome to another episode of the Jampack Report today for December the 17th of 2020. Of course, my name is Samuel Adams and this is a daily gaming news podcast meant to bring you the hottest news you need to know from around the industry. Hosted on YouTube and podcast services around the world 5 days a week, it's your one-stop shop for everything you need to know. So if you enjoy the show and you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and keep coming back for more. But over the course of the past few years, Nintendo has been involved in lawsuits regarding Joy-Con drift, and many players around the world have experienced this issue, which is essentially where the analog stick on one of the Joy-Cons begins to drift slightly, so your character turns or moves ever so slightly. But when it comes to precision in games, and when it comes to generally just not walking across your town in Animal Crossing, it becomes a pretty big issue, and Doug Bowser has now mentioned that it could improve Switch Joy-Cons to mitigate drifting, which is a pretty interesting ripple in the entire narrative unfolding here. Nintendo of America president Doug Bowser has suggested that the platform holder could improve Switch Joy-Con controllers in the future to mitigate the prominent drifting effect. The drifting Joy-Con issue, which causes analog sticks to register movement even when untouched, has seemingly been a problem since Nintendo Switch launched in March 2017, but it was brought to a wider public attention with the filing of a US class action lawsuit in July of 2019. Since then, Nintendo has been hit with multiple Switch Joy-Con drift lawsuits, which allege that the company is aware of the problem but has chosen to continue selling defective products rather than fix it. Most recently, a group of 9 European consumer rights groups launched a joint investigation to see what can be done to protect Nintendo Switch buyers from drifting Joy-Con controllers. Nintendo's global president offered the company's first public Joy-Con drift apology during an investor Q&A in June 2020. However, to date, the company has given little indication of whether it intends to fix the issue. Speaking in a new Polygon interview, Nintendo of America boss Doug Bowser gave the clearest indication yet that Nintendo could be considering fixing the drifting issue with future Joy-Con iterations. Asked if Nintendo would look into fixing the defect, Bowser claimed the company was closely monitoring what was being sent to it for repair and had, quote, an opportunity to make improvements, end quote, to the controllers in the future. First and foremost, we want every consumer to have a great experience with their Nintendo Switch and with the games they play on Nintendo Switch, he said. That is of utmost importance to us. Our mission is to put smiles on faces, and we want to make sure that happens. If consumers have an issue with our hardware and or software, we want them to contact us, when we will work through the proper solution to get them up and running as fast as possible. He added, specific to the Joy-Cons themselves, we've been working very closely with consumers if and when they might have issues, whether it's a replacement or repair. And then what I will say, as we look into our repair cycles, we're always looking at what is being sent in and for what reasons, and understanding that better. And without going into any details, it always gives us an opportunity to make improvements as we go forward, end quote. One potential avenue for Nintendo to improve its Joy-Con controllers is via a potential upcoming hardware redesign. Multiple outlets have reported that Nintendo is preparing to launch a new Switch hardware in 2021 and that it might feature upgraded computing power and support for 4K resolution graphics. Asked about a Switch Pro, as it's been nicknamed, Bowser played down the reports that it's planning an imminent Switch revamp, Right now, with the momentum that we have, our focus will be on existing form factors, he said. First, we are always looking at technology, and as we know, technology is constantly evolving and changing, and we're always looking at what is coming to determine how can it enhance and improve the gameplay experience, and whether that's on a current platform or whether it's on a future platform, we are always looking into that. However, we also see right now, and we just talked about it, that the momentum on Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch Lite in the 4th year is strong, and we believe that we're changing the trajectory of another typical console lifecycle. And we will continue for the foreseeable future to really lean into both of those platforms and the content that comes with it, because it's the symbiotic relationship that makes the real difference, and that's why Nintendo Switch is so differentiated. This is a tricky situation because the Nintendo Switch, by and large, is a successful console. In fact, in the launch month of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, Nintendo Switch was still the best-selling console. Now, of course, the availability of a Nintendo Switch is very different from that of a new generation console because, quite frankly, you can pretty much find a Nintendo Switch anywhere, but finding a PlayStation 5 and a Series X may be a bit harder, so those metrics are probably going to be skewed in December, January, February, February, and so forth. But the Nintendo Switch has had an incredible run, and it's one of the most successful gaming consoles of all time, so I also understand the ease of just being laid back about the entire situation, saying if it's still selling, then why fix the situation? Why find a solution to the problem? Ultimately, you find a solution to the problem because people are complaining about it. So I'm not sure how deep the research is on the back end of going in and finding out what's wrong with these Joy-Cons, of redesigning Joy-Cons and releasing new iterations of them, but in my opinion, Nintendo is probably going to coast through the Nintendo Switch generation, make repairs and replacements when necessary, and then in the next piece of hardware iterate an assurance that there is not going to be any kind of drifting joystick on your Joy-Con controller. Now, is that the best outcome? Probably not, but if you consider the lifespan of the Nintendo Switch, you're already at about the halfway point. I mean, 2021 is going to mark 4 years on the market whenever March rolls around, so you're looking at about the time that we would see a mid-generation upgrade, which brings me to the question of, are we going to see a Nintendo Switch Pro? And I could see both a yes and a no answer to that question, because the Nintendo Switch, again, is selling very well, and it's never going to compete with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X or a high-end gaming PC, because that's not what Nintendo does. They aren't in the market for cutting-edge graphics. They aren't in the market for the highest frame rates. They're in the market for fun. They just want to make fun games for people to play, and whether that's on powerful hardware or non-powerful hardware, you're still able to achieve that through a Nintendo product. And so I think that if you see an upgraded Switch, that it will probably support 4K, it will probably support better graphics, but ultimately, I think when it comes to the handheld version, you will have a 1080p screen and probably a larger battery to accommodate that 1080p screen, which will of course draw more power. But do you need that? Because the Nintendo Switch itself, as it stands today, looks fine. It's a 720p screen, it's acceptable, it's technically HD, not by YouTube standards anymore, but it's technically HD. And so the question is, do you really need a Switch Pro? And I'm sure that many people would love to see it come to market. In my opinion, what should happen is that we see a Nintendo Switch fully fleshed out home console that does not take the handheld situation into consideration, because then you would have a console that does both, one that's dedicated to the handheld mode and one dedicated to the home mode. Then you could put all of your resources into that, make something that's a bit beefier, maybe put an actual GPU in it, and then you actually could have something that is a more powerful piece of home hardware. But will they go that route? Yet to be seen. However, it is an option if they did want to go that way. Now, moving on to another platform, Stadia has come to the iPhone and iPad with a new iOS beta. This comes just one day after the Android version has launched. Google Stadia has finally made its way to iOS over a year after launch. The company's mobile web beta for the iPhone and iPad, first announced last month, is launching today. That means any Stadia user on either its free tier or its paid Stadia Pro subscription will be able to access their library of Stadia games on Apple devices. Google, like other competing cloud services, is using mobile Safari due to Apple's restrictions on cloud gaming apps that mean platforms like Stadia cannot exist in their current form on the App Store. You can access Stadia through its website on Safari or by creating a home screen icon that will turn the service into a progressive web app, so it acts almost identically to a native one. Unlike Nvidia's GeForce Now or the planned mobile web version of Microsoft's xCloud, however, Google Stadia has a free tier without restrictions and now offers 2 free-to-play games available, Destiny 2 and Super Bomberman R, with more to come. Nvidia also offers a free tier of GeForce Now, but it has a 1-hour session limit. That means anyone with a Gmail account looking to try Stadia can give it a shot on an iPhone or an iPad with minimal effort. That accessibility could be key for Stadia's growth going forward. Much of the early struggles of Stadia and the many failed or otherwise unknown cloud platforms that have come before it have to do with a mix of technical issues and economic hurdles, roadblocks that mean actually using the service as your primary gaming platform is more cumbersome and costly than the benefits. But Stadia is in a much different place now than it was at launch. The service not only has a free tier and free-to-play games, but it also has access to high-profile holiday releases like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and the just-released Cyberpunk 2077. CD Projekt Red's new open-world sci-fi game has been plagued by bugs and performance issues, mainly affecting players on last-gen game consoles, which is a boon for the Stadia version. Google had to shut down a promotion for the game that awarded free Stadia controllers and Chromecast Ultra devices to anyone who pre-ordered or purchased Cyberpunk 2077 on Stadia up to a week after its release due to overwhelming demand. Adding iOS support may add to the momentum Stadia is experiencing right now. I've had access to the beta on The Verge's Stadia test account for the last week or so, the author says, where I've been testing Cyberpunk 2077 and other games on my iPad Pro and iPhone 11 Pro. It works remarkably well, even with the built-in touch controls. I would not recommend relying on those touch controls for anything that requires precise input, but it was nice to know I could still maneuver the Destiny 2 interface using my iPhone touchscreen to perform simple tasks like carouseling or carousing. Carousing? That's an interesting. In the in-game tower hub to pick up bounties or check my character's inventory. Of course, they go on to talk about compatibility with PlayStation 5 and Xbox One and Series X controllers, but ultimately, the new Stadia iPhone/iPad interface is now here in beta, so if you do want to dive in, give it a shot, you can check it out for yourself. But Stadia has been on a roll, and quite frankly, it's pretty impressive. Of course, I talked yesterday at length about the situation on Android and people that I know in their experience with Stadia, but if this trajectory continues, Google could legitimately have a cloud gaming platform that is not a complete failure. Now, will it ever compete directly with PlayStation and Xbox? No, but it's not really trying to. And again, I think that when it comes to Google Stadia and Amazon Luna, you can really see where the value could come, because with Chromecast and Amazon Fire Sticks in homes around the world, you have automatically a huge install base. And so if implemented properly, and if the backend is structurally sound enough, you could have a very large gaming platform. Now, while it might not be the most vocal of the gaming community, it's still giving players around the world access to the better version of Cyberpunk 2077 as compared to PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and pre-next-gen launch, even Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. Now, on top of that, there are plenty of new games coming. There are some exclusives on Google Stadia, of course none that really are turning heads, but they are there. So it's interesting to see the strategy that Google is taking, and the failure of last-gen hardware is certainly the success of Google Stadia, it seems. But speaking of CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077, there's another piece of news related to the Polish publisher and game developer that is not exactly faring well for the press. GOG has walked back the release of controversial horror game Devotion. Red Candle Games has once again lost its platform. Hours after announcing it would bring controversial horror game Devotion to its platform, CD Projekt Red's digital storefront GOG has reneged on its release plans. The company's social media account claims that, quote, after receiving many messages from gamers, we have decided not to list the game in our store. Devotion has been at the center of a censorship controversy since release last year, after players found in-game content that referred to Xi Jinping, the president of China, as Winnie the Pooh moron. The Chinese leader is notoriously sensitive to the cartoon bear, to which memers have continuously compared him. The movie Christopher Robin did not get a Chinese release. Mentions of comedian John Oliver were outright censored on social media after a segment that mentioned the Winnie the Pooh comparisons. Players review-bombed the game, and the developer pulled it from Steam shortly after. At the time, Taiwanese developer Red Candle Games issued several apologies, first claiming that they had pulled the game due to a QA check and that the art's inclusion was a mistake. The developer later addressed the art in question more thoroughly, saying, quote, "We failed our players' anticipation and offended many others due to the said mistake," Red Candle Games wrote on Steam. "For that, we feel awfully sorry and devastated. Red Candle Games takes full responsibility and bear all the condemns. We certainly hope that this end with Red Candle." Okay. "And that please do not take it out on all innocent partners," end quote. In the months following, Devotion struggled to find a new home. In a statement printed by The Verge's sister site Polygon, Red Candle Games said that, quote, "in the aftermath of the incident, some still possess different speculations about Devotion. As regretful as the incident was, we have to bear its full consequence. We hope for a second chance in the near future, a chance to prove that both Red Candle and its partner simply wanted to create a great game and no one wished for such an incident to occur," end quote. It has been a busy news cycle for CD Projekt Red, better known as a developer than for its PC storefront over the past week. Of course, Cyberpunk 2077 bugs and subsequent refunds, and the refusal of Sony to offer these refunds in some cases is certainly making a negative news cycle. And we'll talk about what it has potentially cost them more in a moment, but ultimately Devotion and its situation is very complex here. And GOG, for those that don't know, is kind of what I would consider to be the closest you are getting to an open platform on PC. It's much more free and available than Steam in a way, and it also has a lot of new features that kind of allow you to launch anything from anywhere. So you can combine your libraries together and just launch everything from GOG Galaxy. But when it comes to GOG itself, again, it is owned by CD Projekt Red, so they have a responsibility to choose the direction politically that their company wants to go, and unfortunately, what would be just a straight, narrow horror game has become the focus of what appears to be politically charged conversation, and that's always a bit dicey in the world. Now, of course, for those that have not been keeping up with what's happening with China, there's the Free Hong Kong controversy that's also been in the news a lot recently, and again, Xi Jinping is kind of at the center of all of that conversation as well. Now, not to get too into the weeds, because I know a lot of you use this platform and this podcast as escapism, but it looks like there is a lot of conversation happening behind the scenes about Devotion, and a lot of people in the gaming community not happy that it's political, and in general, politics can vary from person to person, so their personal beliefs can impact the way they receive this news. Regardless, huge bummer, because I know that the developers worked hard on this game and they're trying to help it find a platform, but whenever a political statement is made with such a veracity, it's such a direct political statement that ultimately you pay the piper one way or the other, whether you're gaining tons of fanfare or you're gaining tons of hatred and vitriol. You just kind of have to play the game and see which way it goes. See what I did there with the play the game thing? But regardless, that's what's happening with Devotion and GOG. Now, the final story of the day is a bit misleading, and I'll explain why. CD Projekt Red founders have lost $1 billion since Cyberpunk 2077's launch. Technically, yes, but also not really. Due to the rocky launch of Cyberpunk 2077, the developers of CD Projekt Red have collectively lost over $1 billion. After years of excitement and a massive marketing campaign over the course of the last 2 years, Cyberpunk 2077 launched and was quickly torn down. The game has a myriad of issues, from random bugs and glitches to outright unplayable performance on last-gen consoles. Although Cyberpunk 2077 has more than made up its cost already, it seems that the founders of developer CD Projekt Red are still managing to lose money. A report released by Bloomberg yesterday found that the game's glitches and rocky launch have cost the founders of CD Projekt Red over $1 billion. Over the course of the past week, the company's stock has plummeted, although not to record lows. Due to Cyberpunk 2077's numerous issues, the developer has provided an apology, stating that it did not pay enough attention to the game's performance on PS4 and Xbox One, and it went on to recommend that players refund the game if they are not pleased with it. The Bloomberg report also notes that the stain that has now formed on CD Projekt Red's reputation can't be ignored. The company, which has been celebrated for the Witcher franchise of games, now finds a lack of public trust. With its previous franchise, CD Projekt Red established itself as a developer of high-quality games and was adored for such. Now, public opinion on the company, which has been caught in lies regarding Cyberpunk 2077's performance, has flipped. It is not clear what CD Projekt Red can do to recover its public face. CD Projekt Red has promised that Cyberpunk 2077 will receive massive updates in the coming months to address its performance and stability issues. The game also has more content coming in the future, including DLC and a multiplayer component. The game will supposedly receive free content updates sometime during 2021, with a multiplayer mode due out by 2022. So this is, from what I can see from this article, in regards to stocks. And stocks fluctuate. Anybody that is in the world of investments can tell you that while you could make thousands of dollars one day, you could lose thousands of dollars the next. And so whenever there is negative sentiment around a company, or a game in this case, that a company has made, you see that stock price tank. And so technically, yes, they lost $1 billion. But whenever these two patches come out in January and February, if they are effective and if they fix the game, it's going right back up. So they haven't really lost any money. On top of that, I have full faith that Cyberpunk 2077 will be a good game. when it's finished, because right now this is essentially an early alpha or a beta of the game. I would say more of a beta. It's about at that stage. And so once the quote-unquote full release comes out with the next-gen hardware supported and with a ton of improvements across all of the platforms and new DLC and new multiplayer, I'm sure that it is going to recoup any kind of funding lost, and it will continue to generate tons of money because people want to play Cyberpunk 2077. The community might seem upset right now, but anybody that's complaining out there online, I guarantee if you went to them and said, hey, I have this $10,000 gaming PC right here. You want to play the best version of Cyberpunk 2077? Everybody would jump on that. I would jump on that. Absolutely. We are passionate about the game. We want it to be good. And of course, right now there's kind of this bandwagon on Twitter, especially, that I've seen where people jump on board and they hound on Cyberpunk and they hound on CD Projekt Red. But ultimately, behind all of this social media spewing hate, you do see a passionate community that wants a good game, because this is and was one of the most anticipated games ever. And we want it to be the game that we thought that it was going to be. And eventually it'll get there, and they will recover their money. But technically the price of the stock has dropped so much that they've lost $1 billion, but don't worry, that will eventually come back in full. So, that rounds out today's episode of the Jampack Report. If you enjoyed today's show, drop me a like down below and let me know what you think about Nintendo and Joy-Con drift. Have you experienced it? Do you know anybody that has? And do you plan on checking out Google Stadia? A little follow-up question. Would love to hear what you have to say. But until tomorrow, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon, and peace.